Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Dr. James Bare. Dr. Bare is a doctor of chiropractic and is a living legend in the ever-buzzing world of frequency technology. He is, bar none, the most accomplished and knowledgeable scientist to pursue Dr. Raymond Rife's research on frequencies. Welcome, Dr. Bare.
Well, thank you for having me, Natasha. And that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you. That was very kind.
I'm so delighted you're here. There's so much possibility in this conversation. And I invite people just to keep an open mind, because there's stuff that goes on in the world that we accept, take for granted. And I was thinking the other day, even electricity. I mean, I don't have to believe in electricity. I just have to know that it works, and I don't have to understand it. So we hear the word frequency and we think, okay, frequency, vibration, but I don't know how to translate that into what you're talking about, using it as a healing methodology.
Yes. Well, you're exactly right. It is vibration. It is a form of vibration, and it's a form of frequencies allow energy from the emitter of the frequencies to couple into the body, cancer cells, or what have you. And that's the amazing thing about frequencies, is they couple that energy, and that produces some kind of physiologic response.
So how does it get translated from frequency into the body?
Well, that's a good question. There's several different ways. NovaCure, for instance, uses electrodes, and it's placed around the cancer tumor, and then a certain frequency is used. Now, at particular frequencies, the response, they've done trials, and the response increases by over 50% compared to just some general random frequency. So there's a tuning that affects. In the case of, now, this is what's really neat about frequency devices, are that because they use frequencies, think of a frequency equals some sort of medication, where you use a different medication to produce a different effect. What one does is one changes the frequency to produce a different effect.
So there are specific frequencies for specific conditions that then make a difference or
That's
impact?
absolutely correct. Yes. It's pretty amazing. I'll give you an example. Like in dealing with cancer, they may treat like glioblastoma at 150,000 cycles per second, whereas they may go in and treat mesothelioma at 100,000 cycles per second. It's a whole different way of looking at things and considering how to manipulate things physiologically.
And is it does the research, the research had to include figuring out which frequency matches which disease, right?
Absolutely. And that's what's really neat. Now, part of the problem is, of course, when one's using frequencies, you have to develop whole new testing methods to figure out how can we cross-correlate what's happening here on my little test sample as to what may be happening in the body. And there's kind of a way to do that, but I don't think it's really complete, and it's still to some degree developmental, regardless of what anybody's doing. There's still a lot of understanding. This is a huge field that's just opening up. And I'm going to be talking a little later on about other applications besides cancer. But just to toss out a few things about cancer cells, NovaCure uses it to block the replication of the cells as the cells start to divide. So it jams that process, and then the cells basically either stop dividing or they die. And they have really good results doing that. But there's other changing frequencies around, however, can produce different effects in cancer cells. And we have a small research group, and we've done studies with this. And we can actually disrupt in the process of cell division, little tiny spindles form. And we've actually been able to disrupt their ability to create these spindles, so the cells will pull apart and duplicate. And also,
and what is your machine?
It's called the Rife-Bare instrument. And It's presently produced commercially up in Canada by Resonant Light Incorporated, and it's a great machine. They've been in business for 20 some years, and you know, look into that if somebody has questions. They'll be more than happy to answer your questions.
I want to. I mean, it sounds. It's so on the one hand, in my world, it makes sense. Okay, why
Yes.
wouldn't we use frequency? Because frequency has an impact, and we're already using frequencies all the time.
Uh-huh.
Why haven't we jumped on this? And like, so you say, you know, this company's been in existence for 20 something years, but I would think that in the world of looking for solutions, if we are indeed looking for solutions, why haven't we put a lot of effort and money behind this?
Well, that's part of the problem. It's the money. And let me give you an example of what's happened here. So in testing, say, for example, an antibiotic, which is multi-spectrum, they work on many different bacteria. The FDA doesn't make the producer of that antibiotic go out and test it on everybody that has 25 or 30 different diseases from 25 or 30 different bacteria before they approve it. In the cancer world, though, each individual type of cancer and each variation of that cancer has to undergo a multi-year clinical trial. The cost is unbelievable. Novacure, which is partially backed by one of the founders of Microsoft, they're in it for over $500 million so far. It's staggering. And so there's just no money. Our little research group has tried to get funding for some research from specific types of research funding grants that were for out of the box or paradigm shifting potential technologies. They just turned us down. We've tried and tried, and it goes nowhere.
Do you meet a lot of resistance? Do you meet a lot of resistance when you talk to regular people?
Regular people? No, regular people are actually, that don't have some kind of financial or personal stake in it. I mean, what do you do if you spent your whole life training to treat diseases using medications, and all of a sudden someone comes along with frequencies? Well, you're not going to be too amenable to funding such an endeavor.
Yeah.
But the average person gets it, and that's who basically is driving this. It's shall we say, it's consumer driven. It's not politics, and it's not the funding white towers that are making this happen. It's happening around the world. There are, like, the number of frequency devices of all types, in my estimation, is probably in the world right now is probably pushing 1 million. Believe it or not. I mean, there's a lot.
That's great. So I want to ask you, while I have you here, I want to make sure I extract everything I can from you. Can frequencies be used for viral infections?
Oh, yes. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with what are called electrostatic precipitators. You use them in your home and they pull dust and pollens and things out of your home. Well, it also pulls out viruses, because viruses have a charge on them. And when one induces, like with my instrument, it doesn't use electrodes, it produces a field, and that field couples to the body. When one induces a field into the body, well, the viruses can and do react to that. And further, viruses need certain types of electrical forces to just assemble themselves once they're inside the body. You can disrupt that whole process. I don't have patents on it, but there are patents on that type of process one can find in the literature. It's like nothing new. Again, it's about funding and to push that whole process forward. And that doesn't apply just to humans; it applies to plants and animals. There's a huge potential in application that can be used here. So viruses, absolutely. I'll tell you, I mean, there are groups, there are Rife-related groups. One is the Rife Forum online, and one can look and scan through all the postings from people that have instruments and see what they're using them for.
Is there anything, so let's say I'm trying to use a frequency to disrupt the multiplication of a virus, can I do any damage?
No, that's what's really nice is that you see our cells have a normal electrical potential to them that's in the positive range. And what happens when a cell gets sick, its electrical potential drops significantly. It's one way to determine if the cell's not doing well, is you got low electrical potential. And what the device or other instrument does, it introduces frequencies to the body. The energy that's carried with the frequency tends to charge the body, and it charges the cell's membranes, and it brings things up, and the cells actually function better. I mean, literally one of the side effects of using my instrument is you don't want to use it late at night. It's very stimulating. It's like just literally charges you up, and you bounce around off the walls without sleeping. So,
well, let's talk a little bit about that. I want to ask you, like, so what exactly does what do you have to do to use this instrument? Is it huge? Is it small? Do I wire myself up to something? Are there tubes? How does this work?
No, that's what's really great about my instrument. It's a field device. So is it large? Well, I'm like, they're probably, say,
Bigger than a
15
bread
inches
box?
by 5 inches tall or so.
Okay.
Not very big at all. There's a little tube on top, and the tube takes the energy that's coming out of the box and converts it into the fields that are then utilized. And the fields, I mean, I'm going to get a little technical, but
Okay.
the fields are not radiating. They are basically what's called an electrostatic field, or an electroevanescent field, and they don't radiate, but they do couple to the body. You just get close, like within 3 to 6 feet. There are technically effects out to as far as about 27 to 30 feet.
Wow. And how long, I mean, I'm assuming it's different for what you're trying to achieve, but typically, how long would I do this?
All right. That's a good question, because there are certain things we found. And one of them is you have to use a frequency for a long enough period to produce some kind of, the change you want to induce. And often it's not one frequency, it's called a frequency set. So one might use anywhere from 5 to 30 frequencies at a minimum of around 3 minutes or so each, maybe a little more. Sometimes people will run
Consecutively, not simultaneously.
That's correct. One sequentially after the other. And they would, so like a frequency set might run anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half. It's possible to run one frequency for a prolonged period of time. Certain things necessitate that. I'll give you an example that I know of that people do, and they'll use, like, for a shingles herpes outbreak, they'll run like 1 or 2 frequencies for about 30 minutes each. And that seems to be fairly effective for that.
Right. I mean, there's so many applications that one could extrapolate from that. Let's talk about, right now, the big thing is, threat of not enough food on the planet. And do frequencies have a usefulness in agriculture?
Well, they do. And this actually goes way back to the turn of the 20th century, back in the late 1800s, early 20th century, when electronic stuff was starting to first come about. It's called electroculture, and you can look that up. Basically, people would put wires up on their fields and grow devices by running small electrical currents through it. But there's other studies that have been done recently, and one of the things that you can do is you can pre-treat seeds. That old farmers' concept of planting right after the full moon or right at the full moon kind of thing. There's something to that, apparently, and there've been studies done. For example, like with cotton, they've been able to increase the output of cotton with doing nothing else but just pre-treating the seeds by about 40%. Other foodstuffs have done the same thing. They germinate faster, they grow faster, and they produce more, doing nothing more than just pre-treating the seeds.
Are there people or places around the world that are using this technology for agriculture in any
Uh,
meaningful way?
nothing really commercial that I'm aware of. There's people doing it individually. You can find their websites by looking around for electroculture, but it's not widespread. It's something kind of underground, one might say. It's just not well known about. But you'll see huge plants that these people are growing.
Wow. And I think what I really appreciate is you're giving people places to look in case they are interested. So have there been any experiments done or work done with people with Alzheimer's?
Oh, Natasha, that this is something that's quite poignant to many families. And the answer is yes. And if one wants to hear something else, you can look up. Just type in 40 Hz, that's cycles, for Alzheimer's. And this was done by a couple of different universities, and they found that it initially was using a 40 cycle set of glasses with little LEDs in them that would flash 40 times a second. They were helping people undo some of the effects of Alzheimer's.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And it turns out that it's more than that. It's a 40 cycle apparently. So they've done things. I've seen some studies where people have used like earphones and other things, and there seems to be some beneficial effect from that, where it detangles these uh, problem proteins that are in the brain that constrict
You know,
everything.
it's very believable, but unbelievable in
Yes.
terms of the possibilities. Um, Now, in my research, I've gone on YouTube and looked for different hertz. Someone had suggested trying something, and so they talk about they actually have on YouTube. So let's say this number of hertz for sleeplessness or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then there's whatever the sound is that they are playing, and it's not necessarily musical. Some of it is pretty screechy. Can one benefit just from listening to something on a computer?
Well, to a degree, yes. There are limits to each type of frequency, the way in the manner that it's applied. So when one's using some kind of audible frequency, then it's going to be affecting through the ears into our nervous system. And of course, everybody knows the positive effects or negative effects of music. You can change your mood pretty quick with the right song. I mean, that there's nothing new in that. But using individual tones, one can also create certain effects with the brain and change things with the way your brain operates and functions in a very positive manner. There are what are called right now vagal nerve stimulators, and these are used to stimulate the vagus nerve, and they're using that for people with mental illness, for treating OCD and schizophrenia and PTSD and on and on. It's not widely talked about or known, but it's there and it's for anybody to do. Vagal nerve stimulators also affect uh, the immune system. And so one of the first things they were using it for was treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease, and it was stopping it.
Really?
It doesn't reverse the damage, but it stops the further damage because somehow it stabilizes the immune system. Yeah.
Wow.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it's amazing, exciting, and frustrating at the same time. Because frustrating because we're not educated enough, and we don't have easy access to this. But you're suggesting that there are places out there that we can look and educate ourselves and maybe tap into for ourselves. So, what would you like to say to people about exploring this, or if I said to you, what's your main message, what would it be?
Well, my main message is that whether you choose to do and look into or even utilize anything having to do with frequencies or not, the change is coming, and it's not going to necessarily be in the next 10 years or 15 years, but definitely the young children that are alive today, within their lifetime, the next 50, 60 years, are going to be utilizing these on a more or less regular basis. And frequencies interact with many existing medications to enhance their effect. And in fact, the combination of the two are used in several types of cancer treatment. But the bottom line is that there'll still be a place for medications, but there's going to be a new place for the use of frequencies. And in the next coming decades, and we're talking 50, 60 years or more, there'll be a complete shift in the way people think and behave and act in regards to the use of frequencies. That is coming. If you want to look into more about it, just be aware that sometimes there's many people selling frequency devices. Know that there are limitations with each type of frequency device. Be aware that sometimes manufacturers, they tend to exaggerate a bit about what the capabilities are, but when they work, boy, they're great. But for example, here's something. If you have like an electro type device, you only put so much energy through the electrodes before you either damage your skin or you electrocute yourself. So there's a limitation to the amount of energy that can be put into your body.
That's amazing. And so then the question is, we all want to do our due diligence and kind of make sure we get the best and the optimal results. How would one do that due diligence? I mean, people make claims. How would one know?
Well, that is an issue. And I will say, look for, if one's considering a device, look for companies that have been around for a while, that are producing instruments. There are some, it's not necessarily the cheapest price or the most expensive. It's the most, shall we say, the most honest and reliable of companies. And, if you join a couple of there's some Rife-related groups, and they can help if you have questions about that, or you can just browse and look at some of the postings and see what people have had to say and what they've been doing and been up to. The bottom line is you can use devices for a lot of different things. One of the more common things people have been doing is they've been using frequency. Of course, there's this line problem that's out there. Frequency devices are used widely within the Lyme community, but that's kind of an underground thing.
In the wine community?
Lyme infections. Yes.
Oh, Lyme's disease.
Yeah, okay. Lyme disease. And
okay.
It's used widely there, but no one talks about it. It's just kind of underground, but it's widely used.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah, what's going on? It's just there's a, it's like a gray line you walk, and you have to be careful, because there are people that don't like that, and it affects potentially their bottom line and their ability to control and power and a lot of other things, and that's unfortunate. It's not right, but that's the way it is.
Well, we're almost at the end of our time, but I do want to say that I checked out some resources, and from Cancer Research UK. It says, despite the evidence that low energy waves might kill cancer cells, we need more research. So they're admitting and they're acknowledging that it makes a difference. They're just saying, and there was another, website from, I think it was affiliated with NIH. And again, they're actually saying, yes, but. So at least that's positive. But yes, go ahead.
Oh, you're right. The thing is, some of these people making these type of pronouncements have no training at all or background in the use of frequencies.
Yeah.
So, they've got a degree and they're well educated. They really have no experience or training or understanding of it. Meanwhile, what the NIH is saying this, the NIH, they won't even fund Novacure. Novacure is all self-funded. That's why it's part of what they've done. But they've still got their approvals, and they're coming on strong. That is a future. And regardless of what these people say, well, there's little evidence or this or that, there's a lot of evidence. And it's one place to look is called the emf-portal.org. And that has all of the compiled electromagnetic effects from papers published around the world, and it's kept updated. It's
Fantastic.
huge.
We are at the end of our time, but I'm glad that we got a chance to get that in. Thank you so much for being my guest, for sharing all this really significant knowledge with us. And again, when you mentioned another 50 years, I think, wow, now, but I guess we'll just have to wait. Again, thank you
Yes.
so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on, Natasha. It was wonderful.
You're quite welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.